The President, please be seated. The court is now in session. Yesterday, we heard testimony of Mr. Francois Ponchot, and questions were put by judges of the bench. All questions had already been put by the bench. It is now opportunity for co-prosecutors and legal lawyers for the civil parties to put some questions to the witness. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Good morning to your honors. Good morning to all parties. Good morning to the public, and good morning, witness. Before I start, Mr. President, I would like to simply signal to you already that we will ask the Chamber to be a bit flexible in terms of the time given to us to examine the witness, given that this is a rather unusual situation where we're only afforded a half day to examine the witness and the defense is afforded twice as much time. So, because this is the case, in fact, for the co-prosecutors as well as the civil parties. So we're going to try to be as efficient as possible, but that will, of course, depend on the way that the witness is going to answer us. If he answers us clearly and briefly, we will try to stand by the time given to us. But if, as yesterday, the witness starts elaborating and getting into many details, then of course it will be very difficult for us to only have a half day. So what I would like to ask now, as of now, is to have a bit of time, a bit of extra time, close to 2 hours for the prosecution. And the civil parties told us that they only require 1 hour. So what I would like now is that the 1 hour time given to the civil parties remain the same and not be affected by the extra time I'm requesting. Witness, as I said, I would like to ask you please to be concise and to focus, to answer only the questions that are put to you in order to not have me question you again in the middle of an answer, which would be a bit unpleasant. So if I need extra clarification in relation to the first answer that you may give us, I will ask you for this extra clarification if necessary. I'm going to base my questions essentially on your book, Cambodia Year Zero, which, of course, is an account of your memories of the time when the democratic regime was being installed. And the reference is E243.1, and this is the version that was... this is the Kailash edition, and this is the only version that has been translated into all 3 languages. I don't know if you have this specific edition. Oh, it is the case. Okay. Otherwise, I can give you a copy. So, my first question, you said yesterday, regarding the period between March 1970 and April 1975, that you knew, or that you had heard, that the Khmer Rouge in the liberated zones were cruel, and that they had committed atrocities in the rice fields, and that they were evacuating citizens from the conquered areas, and they were killing the village chiefs, they were burning houses, and they were taking people into the jungle. So what were your sources of information regarding the situation in these liberated zones back then?
Response. First of all, allow me to clarify what I said yesterday. Americans dropped bomb on the 6th of February until 15th of August 1973. And the bombs killed 40,000 civilians. It's not what the Cambodia Daily captured this morning. Perhaps it was not properly rendered through the interpreter, but I did say 40,000 people were killed. With regard to the sources of information I gathered from the villagers, for example, in April 1975, I was in Kampong Cham. I heard what happened in Boh Canal, which was about 30 kilometers from Kampong Cham. Khmer Rouge soldiers burned down the houses of the villagers and evacuated the people and killed the commune chiefs. I also have the same information from the area near Dom Nak Chong Al, near Cap, because there were groups of Christian mission Christians who worked there, and also I met Christians in Kampong Thom, in the Kampong Ko location, which was about 10 kilometers from Kampong Thom. These villagers were expelled from their home, and they returned home and talked to us about what happened to them and how they were treated by the Khmer Rouge in 1973.
Thank you. So you said yesterday as well that once you arrived in Phnom Penh, you worked with a refugee organization. And were you able to speak about the situation in the liberated zones with the refugees who were coming from the provinces to Phnom Penh?
Response. We talk very often about refugees. In Khmer, although these people speak with dialects, they still trusted us, and they told us about the situation in the countryside.
And did these refugees tell you that they were fleeing the fighting, generally speaking, or were some of them fleeing the atrocities inflicted upon them by the Khmer Rouge?
Response. There were people in both situations. People who were afraid of the war, and as the Khmer saying goes, when the elephants were fighting, the ants would be the victims. From 1973, we could see that a lot of people had to flee because the American bombings.
In your book, Witness, so this is reference again to E243/1 on page 12 in French, and on page 2 in English, and in there it's on page ERN 00862285. I repeat, 00862285. And you wrote the following, and I quote, free translation: "Yet I met one woman from Areeksak on the opposite shore of the Mekong who had climbed the tree when she heard the Khmer Rouge were coming. and was so terror-stricken by what she saw beneath her that she preferred that her legs be eaten by giant red ants. And the children were being torn apart and some children were being impaled. End of quote. And you also said in your book that you were not entirely convinced by what certain people were saying about the crimes committed in the liberated zones. So why didn't you believe the accounts given to you about the Khmer Rouge atrocities in the conquered areas?
Response. I don't remember I have written that, and I don't understand, or I have a problem understanding this question. When I was writing the statement, I did say that I wished Khmer Rouge would come to Cambodia to capture the Cambodia very soon. Even though we knew that Khmer Rouge could brutally mistreat the people, we still believed that it was part of the war tactic. When they won the victory, then they would find it easy to live with the people. At that time, even the Lon soldiers were not in harmony with the people. If the court would like to know how these Lon soldiers were treating the villagers, I would also refer you to a situation when some soldiers who were beheaded by the Lon soldiers. We saw the soldiers who were carrying the decapitated heads of the villagers who were killed. So, based on that, we hoped that we would not wish such brutality to continue, and we lost all the hope that Lon soldiers would bring any peace or hope for us. That's why we trusted that only the Khmer Rouge would be the ones who could save us.
Merci.
Thank you. Indeed, you had hopes. You hoped that the Khmer Rouge would therefore bring peace once they would be in power. And it seems in your book, and based on what you wrote, that you lost hope in the end. So is there any moment that made you understand that in reality your hopes were not well-founded, and that the Khmer Rouge, in the way that they behaved, would not soften?
Response. When the Democratic Cambodia soldiers evacuated the population of Phnom Penh, I changed my mind. First, I thought that only villagers in villages would be evacuated because it was part of the war tactic, as I was convinced. However, when people had to be evacuated from the city, I knew that what I was thinking before was not right.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, I would like to get back to the evacuation of the cities and villages that were liberated by the Khmer Rouge before April 1975. And you said yesterday, and you repeated today, that there was the example of Kampong Cham, Kampong Thom. And you also said yesterday, just before the lunch break, that the Khmer Rouge wanted to eliminate the city classes to create an egalitarian society. So I would like to quote what you said specifically in your book regarding this. And this, again, is E243/1 on page 32 in French, on page 21 in English, and Khmer on ERN, at ERN 00862308-209. So I repeat, 00862308-209. And I quote, the evacuation of Phnom Penh follows traditional Khmer revolutionary practice. Ever since 1972, so this is on page 32 of your book in French. Ever since 1972, the guerrilla fighters had been sending all the inhabitants of the villages and towns they occupied into the forest, often burning their homes so that they would have nothing to come back for. A massive total operation such as this reflects a new concept of society. The mere idea of cities had to disappear, and you say later, all this had to be swept away and an egalitarian rural society put into place. End of quote. Before the investigating judges, this is document E3/370 on page 4 in French, page 4 in English, and page 7 in Khmer. You said the decision to evacuate was part of a systematic policy of the Khmer Rouge, who had already evacuated all the cities and villages that they had previously occupied. This was the case in particular with Kampong Cham in 1973. We thought that this would not be possible in Phnom Penh, given the number of inhabitants in 1975. Yet this is what was organized. End of quote. So, beyond these cities that were mentioned, did you also hear of the evacuation of Udong?
Response. Udong is not far from Phnom Penh, and we also knew that by early 1975, they evacuated people from Udong. Also, I wish to emphasize that it is part of the history. It is not the first time that victors of the war would evacuate the population. When Siams captured Angkor, 100,000 of people were evacuated into Thailand in 1352, and when the Thai Son group, the group belonged to Annam, in 782, they captured Udong. The President, Mr. Francois Poncho, could you please compose yourself and please be concise and respond only to the question being put to you? Could you please refrain from elaborating further than the questions being asked? The Chamber will finally assess or evaluate the property value of your testimony. So what we would like you to do now is to please be brief and respond only to the relevant questions being put to you.
Merci.
Thank you. Based on the excerpt that I read from your book regarding this issue of the cities, is it accurate to say that the mere existence of cities was something that was incompatible with the Khmer Rouge ideology?
Response. Yesterday I said the city was established in the French colonial regime, and from that time, before that time, there was no such a city in Cambodia. On top of that, I also said yesterday that the statement I heard from the cadres of the Khmer Rouge, I do not know whether this statement echoed the statement by the other Khmer Rouge leaders. But at the Le Phnom Hotel on the 18th of April, we could hear from him that there were bad things in the city because corruption was widespread. And he told us that if we had to return to the countryside to do farming, then we would appreciate the real value and quality of life there. And Cambodian people, Cambodian people had to know that we born and we ate rice, so that rice represents us all. So we had to go to the paddy fields and do farming.
Merci.
Thank you. And this concept of city, did the Khmer Rouge tell you, based on what you observed, was this, in their minds, a representation of class struggle?
Response. Cambodian people used to say that Vietnamese were the enemies of Cambodians. But in April 1975, that cadre told me that Chinese were the enemies of Khmers, and it was part of the class struggle because Chinese was in charge of the money. And His Excellency Khieu Samphan talked about the comprador. As we heard on radios of the Khmer Rouge, they mentioned about the compradors. The Chinese took the advantage of bringing the produce of the farmers to sell to the foreigners for benefit.
And according to the Khmer Rouge, were the city dwellers of Phnom Penh impure, or rather had they been contaminated by materialism and corruption?
Response. I think it is correct. City dwellers were corrupt and were not properly did not have proper conduct because they had long hair and they wore some clothes that were not proper, so they believed to be corrupt.
Merci. J'en viens.
Thank you. Let's return to the 17th of April 1975. Yesterday you described the first arrival of the Khmer Rouge. And in your book, on page 15 of the French version, and 4 and 5 of the English versions, and in Khmer 00862288, you wrote, with respect to the Khmer Rouge who had arrived in the city, that they seemed on the brink of exhaustion, completely foreign. They were the only ones who were not rejoicing. Did you notice the total gap between the look of sullenness and austerity between the Khmer Rouge and the general sentiment of rejoice and celebration among the people?
Yesterday, I told the court, when the truck carried the Khmer Rouge soldier all the way to Phnom Penh, people congratulated them. They congratulated those soldiers entering the Phnom Penh. They thought that they were the Khmer Rouge soldier, but actually no, they were not Khmer Rouge soldier. Almost all journalists got confused because they thought that it was the Khmer Rouge that was entering the Phnom Penh, but actually no. The Cambodian people, particularly Phnom Penh dwellers, confused that they thought that the Khmer Rouge soldier entered Phnom Penh, but actually no, they were all surrendered Lon Nol soldiers who submitted themselves and they surrendered. Yesterday, I would like to once again reiterate what I said yesterday. I, together with my friend says, I noticed the young Khmer Rouge soldiers who were exhausted. They wore the Maoist caps, and we noticed that they were of very unpleasant facial expression. You know, it was rather frightening.
Merci. Hier,
Thank you. Yesterday you described what the Khmer Rouge had announced to the population, ordering them to evacuate the city. I'll quote you on page 17 of your book, Khmer 0026862221. And I quote, "Already, as of the morning, there were men who were dressed in black who had appeared in the neighborhoods. You must leave quickly. The Americans are going to bomb the cities. Go beyond 20 kilometers. Don't bring much. It's not worthwhile to lock your homes. You'll be back. You'll return in 2 or 3 days when we will have cleaned up the city." And I've quote, yesterday you said the same thing, but in different words. Now, firstly, while they were telling people to evacuate the city, did the Khmer Rouge go to the lengths of ordering people to take with them materials, supplies, and personal belongings?
The Khmer Rouge ordered people to leave the city. They did not advise people to bring any belonging to them with them.
merci. Est-ce que les Khmer Rouges
And did the Khmer Rouge tell the population if the people would be receiving any assistance during their journeys, if there would be places for them to receive sustenance, if they would be receiving transportation, etc.?
No, they did not tell anything like that to my knowledge.
Dans l'extrait que je viens de lire,
In the passage that I have just read out, there are 2 different reasons that you provided. as conveyed by the Khmer Rouge with their order to evacuate the city. Firstly, there was the imminent American bombing, and it appears that there was one Khmer Rouge soldier who said, if you leave, you will be able to return. And yesterday you also stated that there was Comrade Nim. When you left the embassy of France, who told you that you would be warmly greeted afterwards once the country would be cleaned up. The same terms were used, cleaned up. What did you understand and how did you interpret those words when you heard them being uttered by the Khmer Rouge?
At that time, they wanted to purge the city, and I thought that they wanted to purge those who were from the previous regimes, from the Khmer Republic administration. Now I have a different opinion, but at that time, to my thought, I was of the opinion that they were actually searching for the official from the previous regime, namely the Republic Khmer administration officials.
Est-ce que vous avez...
And while you were gathering the refugee accounts, either of those from Vietnam, Thailand, or Paris, and amidst your research with former military officers, did those individuals talk to you about the execution of those people?
Not only for the interviewees or the refugees, but on the 22nd of April 1975, when I was still at the French embassy at that time, I met a man about 50 years of age. He was originally from Kien Swai. He told me that Angka requested the military officer and this high-ranking official of the previous regime to write their name on the board in Kien Swai Pagoda. Some of them did write their names on the board. In the evening, they gathered those people, military officers, as well as the high-ranking officials, and they killed them. That was sometimes in on the 22nd or 23rd of April 1975. Later, I also had access to information, and I describe it in my book. I also indicated that they executed soldiers in Phnom Tapadei. Some 300 of soldiers were executed over there. Military commanders who were actually killed over there.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. I'll return to those events later on. For now, I want to center on the evacuation. Yesterday you stated that you were not an eyewitness to physical brutality or violence during the time of the evacuation, and that there was a psychological pressure being exerted on the people. However, you yourself stated that, firstly, the evacuees who had taken to the road, based on what you saw, were not well treated, and that it was beyond one's imagination to conceive that the Khmer Rouge could be brutal. What could compel you to see or believe where this could come from if you saw this around the embassy of France or elsewhere?
I do not recall when I said that the Khmer Rouge did not mistreat the people. Actually, people who left Phnom Penh at that time, they were very frightened. They did not know where they would be ending up. They did not know where they were supposed to go. But I also witnessed the Khmer Rouge mistreated the people.
No.
No, I did not see the Khmer Rouge mistreat the people. I only saw the Cambodian civilians who were leaving the city, and their facial expression appears to be very frightened, and they were very sad leaving the city, but they had to leave the city. I did not see the Khmer Rouge mistreated the people.
Est-ce que lorsque la population quittait...
And of those who were leaving the city, were they being monitored or supervised by the Khmer Rouge?
I do not recall whether or not there was the presence of the Khmer Rouge soldier guarding the people as they were leaving the city, but there tend to be Khmer Rouge soldiers along the way.
Monsieur le témoin, est-ce que vous pourriez répondre?
Mr. Witness, could you please repeat the end of your sentence? I'm afraid that I didn't quite hear it.
I did not see the Khmer Rouge mistreat the people. I did not see the Khmer Rouge escorting the people along the street. I did not see the military officials along the street. Once in a while, I saw the Khmer Rouge soldier escorting the people, but they were not guarding the people as they were leaving the city.
Vous avez dit dans...
In your book on page 18 of the French version, page 7 of the English, and on 00862291 of the Khmer version, you state that one cannot say that there was a significant amount of brutality during this first wave of departures. There were a few gunshots. They had been traumatized by night bombings and relieved by the end of a war. And so they were very willing to reconcile themselves with the goodwill of their conquerors and do anything to remain in their good graces. Were there any physical threats that were being exerted on those who were leaving or refusing to leave?
Yes, indeed, it was a threat, but they did not aim it at people. They did not shoot people, according to what I witnessed at that time.
Hier, vous avez aussi mentionné...
You also stated yesterday that the wounded or the invalid who could not leave the hospitals or refused to leave hospitals would be executed. Can you please tell us who told you this? From whom did you hear this? And did you have any opportunity to speak with the medical staff or foreign nationals or Cambodian nationals who were in the hospitals at the time?
I heard the rumor from others. I did not witness it by myself. Mr. Unal, who was a medical doctor at Praket Tok Milir Hospital, he writes a book on a friend of the Khmer Rouge. He Mr. Saran, whom I worked with him every day, he also told me about the event as well.
Merci. Hier, vous avez dit...
Yesterday, you stated that there was a disabled person who had to leave the hospital, and you were asked to receive him, but you were forced to decline assistance. Can you please tell us why it was not possible for you to help him? Was it because the Khmer Rouge had forbade you or prevented you from helping the person?
No, the Khmer Rouge did not forbid me from helping him, but one may be aware that during the war time, when the Khmer Rouge arrested the Khmer, a Cambodian living with French, then they would kill both the Khmer and the French. And Francois Bizot, who had his friend with him, his friend was taken away and executed. And if he stayed with us, then he would be killed eventually, and you would be killed as well. That's what I was told at that time. That's why I could not help him.
Merci.
Thank you. And on the same topic of the wounded or the sick who were forced to leave the hospitals, when you saw them moving along Manivong Boulevard, what were the foreseeable consequences of this evacuation in the height of the hot season, when there was no means possible to provide these people any assistance given their physical state?
Sooner or later, they would die. That was the only eventual result.
Est-ce que, comme vous,
And like you, do you think that any other reasonable observer who would have witnessed the evacuation of the disabled, the vulnerable, the sick, the wounded, and the invalid leaving the city, would any reasonable person also come to the same conclusion that these people would be subjected to a very high risk of death?
The President, the International Council for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. Good morning, Council. I have to object to this question. We are asking questions to a witness, as we have established yesterday, and this witness couldn't possibly know what any reasonable observer would think about possible consequences. He is not an expert. He might have thoughts which could be interesting, but which are legally not interesting to this chamber. So please, I would like to ask the prosecutor to ask questions to this witness as a witness.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, if I may, yesterday your chamber ruled that such scenarios would be decided upon in a case-by-case basis. The witness is perfectly able to tell us what he witnessed, and he's just simply telling us that these individuals were susceptible and likely to die. And I was simply asking if such an opinion was shared by other individuals or anyone else who could have been witness to the same scene and arrived at the same conclusion.
The President, the objection and the grounds for objection by the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chia is sustained. The witness is directed not to respond to the last question put by the co-prosecutor.
merci, Monsieur le témoin.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. In your book, You quote from an account of a person called Sun Powell on the 18th of November who took refuge in Thailand as of May 4th, 1976. And the person said, on page 36 to 37 of the French version, on page 25 of the English version, and in Khmer 00862321, this is what you write. My family and I left Phnom Penh, heading towards Prak Noi. Many people died during the journey, especially those who had left the hospital, patients who were driven out, the women who gave birth on the road, war casualties. We reached Vak Tak on April 25th. Along the way, we saw many dead bodies scattered about everywhere, even in the pagodas, and the stench that came from them was almost unbearable. You gathered this account, and does it reflect the experience of other refugees who left Phnom Penh and their observations with respect to the vulnerable?
When I was writing Cambodia Year Zero, I made reference to testimony of one of the survivors, and one testimony actually corroborates with one another.
Merci.
Thank you. As an intellectual, did you ever ask yourself why, on the one hand, the Khmer Rouge were asking people to evacuate the city on the 17th of April on the ground that there were imminent American bombs, and at the same time, the Khmer Rouge were forcing the wounded and the sick to leave the hospitals, when you had yourself observed that sooner or later death would befall them? Didn't you notice a paradox between what the Khmer Rouge were saying to justify the evacuation of the city and their treatment of the people in reality?
Above the imminent bombing or the purge of the city, what made me understand the policy of the Khmer Rouge was that if the city dweller went to the countryside to cultivate rice or do agricultural work, then they would understand the true value of life and everything. Because Khmer people had to know that they were actually, they survived because of rice. That's why they had to know that this was the source of their life.
Merci. Avant de revenir sur cette question.
Thank you. Before coming back to that issue, one last point about the evacuation. In your book, on page 21 of the French version, 11 of the English, and in Khmer 00862296, with respect to the 18th of April, you stated that around 10 a.m. a more aggressive patrol arrived and left us no choice. It was either get out or smell gunpowder. So we went to the French embassy. End of quote. When you state that you no longer had a choice, do you believe that you yourself were the object of physical threats and even being held at gunpoint?
No, no, the soldier did not exert any threat on us, but they only exerted psychological pressure on us. We could hardly object, as I said yesterday. They only stare at us. We felt like they were actually intending to kill us also. So we could not actually resist anything. We were in fear, and this was the psychological pressure. Once Viet Cong arrested me on the 4th of May 1970. Viet Cong forbidden me from disclosing anything that I saw, anything. I was very terrified at that time. Over the period of 3 years, I did not even make mention that Viet Cong had arrested me. They actually frightened me. They exerted pressure on me, and I was traumatic with this pressure. The Khmer Rouge operated alike. They just stared at us and we were terrified. The President. Prosecutor, if you have any questions, you can continue putting another question. You should not be hesitant. You may proceed with your question.
Merci. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday you seemed to say that you yourself had believed that American bombing was imminent. At least that's what I gathered. But you also stated just now that the bombing had ceased in August 1973. On that topic, when you were at the Embassy of France, did you or did François Bizot ask the Khmer Rouge why foreigners were being corralled in the embassy, and if they were told that American bombing really was about to occur?
I did not believe that there would be bombing by the Americans, but as for Cambodian ordinary citizens, they would believe in it because a few years back there were American bombings everywhere, some 40 kilometers away from the city, so they still had that memory with them, and they were frightened. So the Khmer Rouge, even the Khmer Rouge themselves, they would... The Khmer Rouge did not believe, and I did not believe it either, but I do not know the ordinary citizen. They might have believed in it.
Merci. Hier.
Thank you. Yesterday, you mentioned 2 reasons that were being given by Ieng Sary regarding the evacuation of the city of Phnom Penh. These are reasons that you had described in detail in your book. Namely, on page 30 and 31 of the French, on page 1920 of the English, and in Khmer, on ERN page 0086, 2306, 207. And you talked about the fact that he had advanced 2 reasons for the evacuation. On the first hand, there was a problem of the cities, and secondly, there was the matter of security. One sees that in an interview conducted by James Pringle on the 4th of September 1979, and which has been cited several times, and on the case file, as well as based on an interview with the Grunk under D199/26.2.37. or 137, corrects the interpreter. In the interview, Yang Sari does not provide the reason of imminent American bombing as a ground for evacuation. Now, upon reading that interview, do you believe that the Khmer Rouge had given false pretext to the population to evacuate the city in 1975?
It was clear. The Khmer Rouge gave the wrong reason. And it was normal that the dictatorship regime gave the lie, told lies to people. So the real reason was the ideological reason. This is from my own opinion. There was no other reason. In a film, it may not be relevant. Excellency Khieu Samphan said that we evacuate the people out of Phnom Penh. That was wrong. We make the people lose hope, lose trust on us.
Concernant la perspective.
And regarding the prospect of famine, which is another argument that Yang Sari raised, and in your book you mentioned two quotes to contradict what he's saying, and you said that regarding the peasant population, Phnom Penh housed about 1.5 million peasants who had fled the fighting, and that they were starved, and they were living in the fear of being mobilized, and all of them were desirous to return to their farms. And second of all, you spoke about the Phnom Penh population. You said that the rice reserves accumulated in the capital over the last weeks would have been sufficient to feed the people over 2 months. And you also quoted the fact that in the harbor of Kompong Som, several thousands of tons of rice rotted without having been used. So now, regarding these reserves of rice, where did you get that information to say that it would have been possible to feed the population of Phnom Penh for 2 months, and also that thousands of tons of rice were lost because they were not cared for in Sihanoukville?
Regarding the rice at Sihanoukville port, I saw it from a newspaper. Regarding the people in Phnom Penh, that was my own speculation, my own estimation. We help hundreds of thousands of refugees. We store a lot of rice to feed them for 1 month or 2 months. And we reserve some rice because we were concerned that the Khmer Rouge would cut off the Mekong River and then we could not have more rice. So we store some rice.
Thank you. And in his interview by James Pringle, Yang Sari said the following. He said, and I quote, "We had to feed this population while preserving our independence and our dignity without asking from the assistance of any country whatsoever." End of quote, free translation. So after the liberation of Phnom Penh, wouldn't it have been easier for the Khmer Rouge to simply call for international support from from countries that were friendly towards Cambodia, and therefore avoid this situation of evacuation?
The President, Mr. Witness, please hold on. The Council, you may proceed.
Mr. President, thank you. The prosecutor is again asking the witness to speculate, and I object to this question.
Je vais passer à un autre sujet, Monsieur le Président.
Well, then I will turn to another topic, Mr. President. In the same interview by James Pringle, and this is in document D199/26.2.137, and it's the third question that is put to Ieng Sary, and this is what is said in this interview. Question, is Phnom Penh still empty? And I'd like to remind you that this interview dates back to September 1975, and Ieng Sary answers, no, about 100,000 people came back, and some people will be coming back little by little. The schools, the factories, the hospitals are active again. And the people can return to Phnom Penh if they wish so, or they can remain in the countryside. Our people are working day and night to rebuild the country. Cambodia looks like a giant workshop. End of quote, free translation. And when Ieng Sary says on 4 September 1975 that there are 100,000 people who return to Phnom Penh, and that the people may return to Phnom Penh if they so wish, does this correspond to what the refugees told you orally or in writing at the same period?
That was a lie. What he said was wrong. I met refugees. As you know, at first the Khmer Rouge evacuated the people to the north, to the south, to the east. And a few months later, in July and September 1975, they evacuated the people again. At that time, I met refugees who traveled across Phnom Penh, and they told me that Phnom Penh was empty. They cried because they saw their house, and they said that Phnom Penh was empty. No one was in Phnom Penh.
And you said in your book that from the French embassy you saw a certain number of trucks loaded with men and women enter Phnom Penh. So this was probably at the end of April 1975. It's page 39 in French, 28 in English, and Khmer 0086231018. Corrects interpreter. Can you tell us if you met one of these people who had returned to Phnom Penh, and which category in the population did this person belong to?
I did not remember clearly whether I saw the trucks transporting people into Phnom Penh. However, I remembered that around 10 women who were the wives of soldiers, high-ranking soldiers, and they were Catholic. I asked them, because at the time I was at the gate of the French embassy, And I asked them, sorry, where are you going? They told me that Angka told us to go back into Phnom Penh, to Santakia Phnom Penh. And I asked them, are you frightened? And they told me that no, Angka is fine. And I feel very frightened, and I tell them to go.
Merci.
Thank you. In your book, you speak about a specific encounter with Miss Samet. I don't know if that's her real name or an alias. She was a Khmer doctor who told you that all of the high-ranking officers had to return to Phnom Penh. Do you know why the Khmer Rouge had asked the high-ranking officers or officials to return to Phnom Penh? Or did you learn this later?
Those women whom I saw were the wives of high-ranking soldiers. They told me that Angka assigned their husband to go into Phnom Penh to rebuild the country. And they went back into Phnom Penh. It was the same in Badambong. Angka was very good at telling lies. They told those people to go back into Phnom Penh, and then they killed those people. Angka cheated them because Angka wanted to kill them. So this is the same as what happened in Kien Swai. Angka told those people to write down their names on the board. Angka cheated them, and Angka killed them. The President, co-prosecutor, please slow down because the interpreter have some problem.
Absolument, Monsieur le Président.
Of course, Mr. President. Witness, you have just said that these were lies and that the aim was to kill these officials to whom the reconstruction of the country was promised. And you mentioned 4 accounts in your book, 4 separate accounts, and you spoke already about the one that deals with the situation in King Svai. And for the purposes of the record, this is the account of the so-named Mam Sarun, who was a captain in Lon Nol's army, and who was in the Kapchung camp in Tai Long as a refugee on 15 February 1976, as well as other refugees, Sun Pal, Yu Kim Lan, and Seng Huot, a professor. All of these accounts are in your book on pages 38 to 40 in French, 26 to 28 in English, and in Khmer at 000862316, 000862316-218. And you said in your book as well, on page 40 in French, 28 in English, and Khmer 0086 2320, 0086 2320, you said the following: several other accounts allow me to assert that the revolutionaries had decided to suppress the greatest number of former civilian and military cadres as of the first hours that would follow the capture of Phnom Penh. Free translation. End of quote. So I would like, therefore, to turn to the situation in Battambang that you have just brought up. And maybe could you explain to us briefly what the refugees you met or whose accounts you gathered in various different places, what they told you regarding the fate of the officers and non-commissioned officers in Battambang.
First of all, I would like to explain about the stages of the revolutionary Cambodia revolution. In 1975, it was the national revolution. The Khmer Rouge aimed to destroy all the people who work for the Americans or the Tribunal regime, who were regarded as traitors. In 1976, it was the democratic revolution. They forced all people from all classes to become the farming class, to join the lower class. In 1977, that was the third stage. It was the socialist revolution. They created cooperatives. Therefore, the killing of the high-ranking soldiers and former civil servants were consistent with the purpose of the national revolution. With regard to the case of Battambang, at Phnom Tepadai, the Khmer Rouge killed 380 people. I had 4 witnesses who survived. One of them was Phim Ruon. I interviewed the 4 people, the 4 witnesses. He told me that the Khmer Rouge told us to welcome Samdech O, who came back to Cambodia. Therefore, those soldiers said goodbye to their wives and wore their uniforms, and then boarded a truck. Then they traveled for around 15 kilometers, and then they turned to Oprea. When the truck arrived at Tepadai Mountain, the Khmer Rouge soldiers were waiting over there, and those former high-ranking soldiers were gunned down. Phim Ruon was injured and fled the scene. Around 6 months later, I met another refugee named Ieng Suvanari. I changed their name, and their relative asked about their information. Ieng Suvanari walked across Tepadai Mountain, and he saw a lot of dead bodies and skeletons and skulls over there. Around 1 year later, another person whose name I did not remember walked along that route and saw the skulls over there. So I have 4 witnesses who survived, and 2 of them walked across that area in different occasions. So this is true.
Monsieur le témoin,
Witness, could you tell us quickly and as concisely as you have done when you were speaking about the officers, what happened to the non-commissioned officers in Battambang at Markol?
Excusez-moi.
I apologize.
De la...
I'm obliged to say that the witness is not speaking about what he saw personally, but repeats things that were told to him. So it might be useful in terms of the record that this be specified in the question, because we have the feeling here, especially with the repetition of the questions, that Father Panchaud is providing us with an account of things he's absolutely sure of and that he saw with his own eyes, which is, however, not the case. So it might be a good idea that in the question it is clear that Père Panchaud is repeating things that he heard secondhand.
The President, thank you. Counsel for Mr. Nunchia, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. And might I add to the submissions of my colleague that in certain circumstances we are in fact speaking about evidence which is legally called a double hearsay, double de auditu. So it's not only a person saying things to the witness, but it's also things that the person sometimes has heard and not even seen directly. So we're speaking here about double hearsay. I'm not quite sure what the standard of evidence is, and I'm sure your chamber will, in the decision, come with a reasoning on the probative value. But we are speaking here, as I said, about double hearsay.
Mr. President, I'm going to address this rapidly. First of all, the Cusompan defense said that in each question it would be necessary to specify what the witness said or saw, but when the witness says that it's not the case that the witness is sure of what he's saying, I think here he's mistaken. The witness said that 4 surviving witnesses had been questioned, and if you read the book you will see that these are people who themselves were officers and who survived the massacres, and others who had nothing to do with the massacres confirmed the same facts. So this is why I'm surprised to hear the Nuanchea defense speak about the double hearsay, whereas what was mentioned here is simply what people have seen directly. These are eyewitnesses who related this information to the witness. So here there's no question of double hearsay. However, Mr. President, I will pay attention to mention in each one of my questions whether these are accounts that were gathered by Father Panchaud or whether direct accounts. So my question is to know whether the witnesses whose accounts you gathered what they were able to tell you regarding the non-commissioned officers in Battambang and what happened to them at Markol along National Road 5.
I do not remember clearly because it happened long time ago, and I have not reread my book before I come here. As far as I can remember, they killed high-ranking soldier and then they released the low-ranking soldier. But of course, later on, they killed all the soldiers.
Merci.
Thank you. I will not have the time to return to what happened in Pailin based on accounts that confirm what the witness knows. But I would like to revisit an account that you mentioned regarding the Khmer who had been turned over to the Khmer Rouge after 17 April, that is to say, those who had to leave the French embassy. And you said yesterday that, in fact, that some of them had been brought to the old stadium, and that and you had heard that some soldiers had been shot down. And I'd like to read a passage from your book on pages 26 and 27 in French, 15 and 16 in English, and Khmer 00862303, 00862303, therefore. And I have a few doubts regarding the Khmer version because I don't know if this passage I'm going to quote is in the Khmer version. But this is what a Khmer chemist says, who was part of the group that left the French embassy and who had to flee to Vietnam in June 1975. And he describes what happened when he left the embassy. And I quote, "We were brought to the Lambert Stadium, 200 meters from the embassy. There, we went through a preliminary processing. The Khmer Rouge asked us to state our identities and write our names on one of the three lists: military, civil servants, people. Then the officers like Major Tan Chia and Colonel E. Bun Suor and high-ranking officials, and I will skip the names, were taken away by truck. And a bit further, the next morning, the Khmer Rouge came back and called out some more names from a list they had ready and took them away. Then they told us to go north and set to work building the country." End of quote. So here we notice in this account, as in many others that you mentioned in your book regarding Battambang, Pailin, Kompong Cham, that there was a separation, or that the Cambodians were broken down into three groups: military personnel, civil servants, and people. So in all of the refugee accounts that you gathered regarding other areas of the country, was this a way that was this systematically implemented?
I believe that Angkar did the same everywhere, as I have just told you earlier. In the first stage, it was the national revolution. They killed the traitors. They killed those who served the Lunal regime and the American regime. I heard this from the Democratic Cambodia radio. The first stage was the national revolution.
Merci. Dans votre livre,
Thank you. In your book, you wrote that there were slogans and mottos being broadcast over the radio, justifying the cleansing of the former Lon Nol Republican forces. Do you recall hearing these mottos over the radio?
Response. Keeping you is no gain, losing you is no loss. Killing a person by mistake is better than having him released by mistake.
Que de mettre un innocent
We should understand Cambodian culture. In Khmer, we believe in Buddhism, and here people killed other because they believed differently from us as foreigners. The President, thank you, Mr. Witness, and thank you, Mr. Co-Prosecutor. It is now appropriate moment for the adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes. The next session will be resumed by 10 to 11. Court officer is now instructed to assist Mr. Pongsho during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom by 10 to 11. The court is adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ